Wow. Welcome to Targeted, the show where we expose masculinity and success. And I'm your host, Atlas Altman, former military commander, director of special operations communications, and just all-around good guy. We are not a dying breed. We have a lot of ground to cover, from strength to writing to inner focus. You have what it takes, and I'm about to bring it out through the stories of the people that have already done it. Welcome. This is Targeted. All right. Today's guest is a man's man. I met him a couple years ago on the set of a TV show, Great American Speak Off. It's Jason Mow. He has a fantastic story. He is going to give us a lot of it today, but he can't share it all because it is that much. So without further ado, Jason Mow, you want to say hello?
Thank you, sir. Thanks, sir, for letting me come here and spend some time with you. This is awesome.
All right. Yeah, this is awesome. I love this. So Jason and I've been talking for a couple years. We've been sharing posts, some of the same mindsets that we have going through our feeds, and some of the same man things, really. And it's really interesting to see social media dive down into where it wants us to be, but how we continuously come back to where we believe right is.
Yeah.
So growing up today, it must be weird, but I want to go back into your childhood real quick.
Okay.
Can you explain to us how your childhood was? Like mom and dad, what was it like?
I thought I had a normal childhood because I didn't have anything else to compare it to, but it was pretty interesting looking back on it. I'm actually a third generation Arizona boy. My parents were my ancestors were some of the pioneers that helped settle like the Verde Valley and the Prescott area.
Wow.
Very influential family up in Prescott, actually, the Tenneys and the Goodmans and the Allens. I've got relatives that were involved in politics and things like that. So grew up in the East Mesa area
In Mesa,
for the
in
most
East Mesa?
part. For those that are familiar with the Phoenix metropolitan area, right across the street from Mesa High School is where I spent most of my time. So I am a fighting jackrabbit from Mesa High School. I spent a little bit of time in Tucson, and my dad helped to build the Palo Verde nuclear plant. So we spent a couple of years in Buckeye, back when it was just a one-horse town.
Yeah.
He was a tradesman and a Democrat, and my mom was a diehard Republican. So there was always some contention every 4 years about which way the family was going to lean. He was 100% union, and she was all about self-governance. And so I gleaned a lot in my early years from listening to those conversations. And my grandmother was actually the state campaign manager for Ronald Reagan. They knew each other on a first name basis. And you didn't get elected in Arizona as a Republican if you didn't spend some time in my grandmother's house.
That's awesome.
And so I grew up listening to people like McCain, listening to people like Goldwater, listening to people like Udall, listening to people like Cleon Skousen.
They were just in your house.
In my grandma's house talking, and I would just be there, just listening, not understanding what's happening because I was so young at the time. But I remember those events happening. And
did they leave an impression on you? Were you like, wow, these people,
they seemed angry. Everybody seemed to walk away from those discussions kind of upset. And I was like, well, what's the point of having the discussion if everybody's going to be upset? And, and it just seemed like everybody was just talking about, nobody wanted to resolve anything. Everybody was just complaining. And I remember that everybody would just sit around and complain about things. And I would think to myself, well, why don't we fix it? This seems simple. This seems like a simple fix. Why don't we just stop doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I think a lot of people can resonate with today. I mean, you hear a lot of complaints, you see a lot of complaints. But growing up with it and seeing all these influential people coming in and out of your childhood, did that give you more hope or less hope for what the future would hold for you?
I at that moment I really didn't have the future in mind because I was under 10 years old at the time, and so I'm more focused on other things, more focused on Star Wars and Legos and things like that, and I wasn't in a good place emotionally and physically too. I had a lot of growing up. I had a lot of personal problems and emotional problems. I had a a speech impediment, and I had some severe learning disabilities.
Really?
And my coping mechanism was food. And
Okay.
so I would absorb copious amounts of food. And so I had a weight problem also. And, uh, and I was almost crippled with shyness, and it would manifest itself in different ways.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what was happening at the time. And so I had to have a lot of therapy to learn to speak correctly. And sometimes if I get excited, sometimes my words get ahead of themselves and I get thick tongued and
Sure.
things kind of lock up in my brain a little bit.
Yeah, I think they do for everyone. I just don't think people admit it.
Which is weird because now I'm a public speaker.
That's
I'm a
right.
professional spokesperson and I do that kind of stuff. And so that was a tremendous thing that I had to overcome. And so I was not in a good place emotionally. And then,
When did you start seeing that turn? Like where you're like, you know what? I can do this way better. Why am I not doing it?
I know exactly when that happened. And that was
Can
when
you tell us about that?
that was when I was in 7th grade. And the wrestling coach at my junior high walked up to me and says, "You're bigger and stronger than everybody else in this school. Why don't you come be a wrestler?"
Yeah.
And he explained to me in how I needed to hear it,
Yeah.
which is a key in education, is that person needs to learn in their method. And he explained to me how I needed to hear it, why it's important to have a foundation in wrestling, not just for sports, but for life.
Man.
And he explained to me that wrestling was the basis for all grappling and combative martial arts.
True. Very true.
And it's all about balance. It's all about tenacity. It's all about control. It's all about just finding that gut instinct and being able to switch it on and off.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that idea. And so I came out for the wrestling team in 7th grade. And I lost every match.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know what I didn't
I
know.
mean, it was your first year.
Yeah, my first year. And
People think that they're just going to jump into wrestling and be good at it.
Yeah.
And that's a very humbling sport, isn't
yeah,
it?
it is incredibly humbling. And I didn't realize, I didn't realize it then, but I do now what that coach was doing for me. And he was setting a foundation for me to become who I am today.
Yes.
And it all goes back to that first year of wrestling.
What was his name?
Coach McCain.
McCain.
Yep.
Not John McCain.
No, a different McCain. Different McCain.
So coach came into your space and he talked to you in your language and he said, "You're stronger, you're bigger, you could wrestle. Why aren't you?"
Yeah.
And that changed the course.
Yeah. And he also encouraged me to go out for football because we didn't have contact football until 9th grade.
Wow.
So he encouraged me to start in the wrestling team, and then 9th grade come see him to be on the football team.
So you did wrestling and football.
I did.
Because he saw something in you.
He did. What he saw was a great big kid that had no direction, that was obese and walking with his head down. And he
How
said,
big were you? I'm sorry.
I was bigger at the time than all the other kids. Yeah. I wrestled heavyweight, just because I was fat. Yeah. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
And what wrestling did was it chiseled that right off of me.
Yes.
I ended up losing 25, 30 pounds in a year, and wrestled in the 180 weight class and the 190 weight class.
You went from heavyweight to 180. Wow.
Yeah. I'd actually have to get a waiver because we didn't have anybody else that was bigger than me. Mm. And so we would have to ask the opposing team if it was okay if this lighter person wrestled heavy.
Wow.
And so I ended up wrestling the heavies when I was 190 pounds. I'd wrestle 315 pound kids.
Yeah.
You know, we had the Native American teams that would come, and they had some big boys that came off the reservation there, and that was interesting to try to wrestle them. It was a soul crushing experience to have that much body come down on top of you and not be able to move. And
can only imagine.
Yeah.
So wrestling and football.
Wrestling and football is what did it for me, and then I didn't realize that I could sing. And I had an interesting voice, and I realized because now that I'm an athlete, now that I've dropped 25, 30 pounds, now that some muscles are starting to poke through my shirt, I'm starting to, the girls are starting to pay a little bit more attention to me. And so I'm like, well, where are the pretty girls hanging out?
Yes.
A lot of the pretty girls were hanging out in the choir.
Yes,
I'm going to give this a try. And so it ends up, I had a pretty good baritone voice. I could carry a tune.
Who would have thunk it?
So I'm walking in with a Letterman's jacket into the choir room, and I'm singing with them. And so I played the system.
Yes,
I figured out where all the girls were, and they were in the choir, and got to hang out with all of them. And my first year I didn't win a match. because I didn't know what I didn't know,
Yeah.
and I was afraid of my own shadow.
Mm-hmm.
But that coach wouldn't quit on me, and I made the determination that I wasn't going to quit on myself.
Now you started that your freshman year of high school?
That wrestling I started in 7th grade.
7th grade. Okay.
7th
So
grade.
you had a foundation before you went into high school.
Yeah, and I had 3 years of competitive wrestling before I even hit high school.
And then you went into high school wrestling as well?
I did. Yeah.
So high school wrestling and football.
Yes.
So you had a team and an individual sport.
Yes.
Under your belt for high school. What is the biggest lesson you learned from those sports? And it could be either one or both. And self-confidence, we already talked about that. You got confidence out of that for sure.
One thing that there are so many life lessons that you can learn from wrestling. It is just you. I mean, it's an individual effort, but it's a team sport also. Yep. I mean, everything you do is for the collective, for the team, but there is nobody else out there in that circle.
Yeah.
You are literally in a skin tight uniform
Mm-hmm.
and there's no hiding.
Nope.
There's no taking a break. You have nobody else to blame. You can't go, oh, the receiver missed the pattern or the center didn't do the block. That's why we failed.
Yeah.
It's you.
Yeah.
And it's a blood sport too.
It is.
There's no fanciness about it. Sometimes it is just raw determination is what gets you through it. And you have to be in condition. If you're not in condition, everybody's going to know it. Your opponent's going to know it as soon as he puts his hands on you if you're not ready for that. The conditioning, the physical and the emotional conditioning that takes to be a wrestler, to be a competent wrestler, is something that I recommend to every person that wants to be a warrior. Is that you get into some sort of grappling art. It doesn't have to be wrestling. It could be jiu-jitsu. It could be judo. It could be sambo. Anything that requires you to put your hands on another person and dominate them,
and tangle
and submit them.
Yeah.
Because the only difference between wrestling and jiu-jitsu is the submissions.
Yes.
It's the same principles. Hip controls, displacement, pressure, joint manipulation.
For me, it was figuring out how my body would work whenever I was trying to engage in something violent.
Yep.
Because you don't get taught that in society.
No.
At all.
And you just don't know practice is practice. There's always that X factor.
Yeah.
You know that you're going to stop. You can tap if it hurts. Mm-hmm. And you're used to the people you're competing with in practice. Yeah. You know their strengths, their weaknesses.
Yeah.
Some of them are friends of yours. You can joke around. You get in the ring with a complete stranger.
It's happening.
And one of you is walking out of the victor. And the person that walks out is the one that's prepared.
Yeah.
Right. 99%. Sometimes it's luck. Maybe 0.5% it's luck, but the vast majority of the wins go to the person that is in that ring more prepared than the other one.
Now, this one's something that I've asked just about everyone on the show. Mentally, when you're going through these challenges where you don't win any matches for a year, and then you start to win, what happens to your mental psyche? Like in your experience, what happened? Did you immediately bolster your confidence, or you're saying, oh, well, maybe I'm getting better? Like, how did that work for you?
It made me hungry. I realized what I was capable of. Yes. I got a taste of it.
Yeah.
I finally could see what everybody else was what I was denying myself and what everybody's saying I wasn't, I couldn't do it, because everybody was bringing me down. Oh, you got these physical disabilities. You can't talk.
Yeah.
You're overweight. You're ugly. All these, my home was broken at this point. All these things that were bringing me down, I figured out something that I was good at, and I got a taste of what accomplishment felt like.
Yeah.
And because my 8th grade year, I won 2 or 3, and that motivated me. And by the time I got to my 9th grade, I was unstoppable.
Yes.
It was awesome. I realized what I was capable of, and that in my off season made me want to try harder, made me want to push more. And I was able to try out for the football team in my 9th grade year. And I was like, you're going to let me run around and just knock people down and hit them as hard as I can? That's my job is to just demolish people.
Bring it.
Where do I sign?
Yeah.
And so I put that helmet on and I became a different person. I was nice. I was in the choir. I was a good Mormon boy.
Sure.
Not cussing or drinking or anything like that, but I snapped that helmet on and something changed. And it was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun.
It's a lot better to go into something like that prepared and with the knowledge that you can than being a first timer. So starting early, that was fantastic for someone to recognize that talent in
Yeah,
you.
saved my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
There's
amazing.
there's a couple of pivot points in my life, and that was one of them.
All right.
When another man walked up and goes, "You can do this,"
Yes.
and he mentored me.
Now, have you done that to anyone?
I have tried because I recognize that, and
Yeah.
I have really tried. I've had the opportunity for most of my adult life to work with the youth in my church,
Yeah.
to be a mentor and an advisor and a teacher to them, and that is my goal.
Yeah.
Is to raise my replacements. That's how I look at it.
That's a great goal. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a great mindset
That
too.
somebody's going to have to do my job when I leave, and who do I want
Yeah.
doing my job? Who do I want guarding my house? Who do I want operating on my heart? Who do I want building my bridges,
Yes.
flying my planes, governing my cities? You know, do I want the second best person? Do I want to just get somebody because they check a box, or do I want the absolute best person doing that job? And that's what I try to do with the people that I've mentored along the way. Is I like, look, you need to. Excellence is standard for a warrior. That is an
Yeah.
everyday thing. Is excellence.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to strive to be.
So, interesting study. I heard it on the Brad Lee show recently, and one of his guests started talking about the Batman theory. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-mm.
So they had some students in the classroom, and they gave half of them capes, and they said, "Do these tasks," right? And guess what happened? The people with capes, the kids with capes,
Yeah.
did on average. They, statistics are probably made up, but 30% more because they were wearing a cape.
Yeah.
I flipped that a little bit. I believe that whenever you come up as yourself, as Jason, you Mr. Jason comes into the room, and Mr. Jason just told me that I'm capable. I believe you just gave them a cape.
Yep.
And I think in our society, we're missing a lot of cape givers.
Yeah.
And the cape givers in my life, the same thing. I have similar stories, but that was amazing what your coach did for you.
Yeah, it was.
And then now you're paying it forward. That's even better.
Every one of the kids I've ever worked with have always heard me say, "You're awesome."
That's good.
Right. Whenever I see them, I go, "You're awesome." Right. And they say that back to me. They go, "You're awesome."
Yeah.
And that's kind of our little, and I don't know how many hundreds of kids that I've looked in the eye and said, "You know what? You're awesome."
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So high school's over.
High school's over.
What are you doing? What are you
now
going to do with
I
your
have a
life?
choice. I have a
Yeah.
choice. I've offered some scholarships to go wrestle for some schools.
Okay.
I worked out a little bit with ASU.
ASU.
That same year that I would have started wrestling for ASU is when they won the national championship and beat the Russian team under a coach named Bobby Douglas.
Yeah.
And we would go and I would work out with them. But I also had the choice to go and do an LDS mission for my church.
Okay.
Back in the late 80s, colleges didn't hold on to scholarships like they do now.
Yeah.
So I had to make a choice. And I had said my entire life and prepared my entire life to be a Mormon missionary. That's what, back in the late 80s, that's what the Mormon boys did, is they went on missions. And I had promised and said and done all these things to prepare myself. And so I made a conscious choice to not take my scholarships and go serve a mission for my church. And so I became one of those, those kids in the white shirts and ties riding their bicycles up and down the streets and just doing that.
Now, how was that?
That was an incredible, life-changing, another pivot point in my life, because I hadn't experienced anything other than Mesa, Arizona.
Yeah.
Maybe
Where'd you go?
Disneyland. I went to Spokane, Washington.
Okay.
So all of my friends ended up going on foreign missions. I had one that went to Australia. I had one that went to
Spokane is foreign.
Well, to a kid from Arizona, it sure is.
It is way forward from where.
Circle of friends. We had Korea, we had Belgium, we had South Africa, Australia, Brazil, and so I'm thinking, where am I going to go?
China.
Somewhere in this world, right? And so from Spokane, Washington, I was like, wait a minute, that's not a mission, that's a road trip, right? That's a day and a half drive away.
And then you found out, didn't you?
Oh, it's completely different. Yeah. I mean, because here we decorate in shades of brown and coyote tan and dust. Up there's trees and there's
everything's
like
green.
actual mountains and there's water everywhere and it gets so unbelievably cold up there. I thought it was a science experiment when they told me how cold it was, but I had a toilet freeze on me and I didn't know that could happen. Right?
So what'd you do?
Well, imagine my surprise. I get up in the morning to take care of my morning business, right?
Yeah,
And there's
yeah.
like this modern art masterpiece sticking out of the toilet.
In
Yeah,
ice sculpture.
ice sculpture sticking out of the toilet, and I'm still half asleep and
Yeah.
bundled up because it's freezing
Yeah.
outside. And I'm looking at it, and I can't
Process
process what's
that.
happening
Yeah.
here. So
Process
I go
that.
back and I tell my companion who lived in Utah, go figure, a Mormon from Utah, and I said, "Dude, there's something wrong with our toilet." And he's like, "What?" And I go, "You're just gonna have to see." And he walks in, he goes, "Oh yeah, it froze." I'm like, "What do you mean it just froze? What do you mean? What do you mean? Oh yeah, it just froze."
Yeah,
But I guess that happens, and we just apparently we're supposed to put some antifreeze in the reservoir and
that's what
leave
happened.
leave a little bit of a drip running in the pipes, and we just forgot. He forgot to do it because he knew and I didn't. But just stuff like that, and
Yeah,
just I'm meeting people that I'd never talked to before, and that we have no interest or similarities at all,
yeah,
and and going door to door, knocking on doors, trying to talk about religion to people.
yeah.
Man, I learned a lot about myself and a lot about people, and
Yes.
I learned
Probably
how.
not good things about
Well,
people.
actually, it was both. I learned that we are incredibly diverse, but there's so much that we have in common.
Mm.
I met people from different religions. I met people from different cultures, different languages, uh, even people within my church, but they live geographically in a different area than me. They think differently
They do.
because they have different experiences.
Yeah.
But we all had that grounding gospel principle concepts that Jesus is the Christ, and so we all had common ground.
Yeah.
And with common ground, you can work through pretty much anything.
I'm with you on that. The team mentality there, all being the same, coming with the same mission.
Yeah.
That's probably the best thing to come forward and talk to people
Yep.
about. Because a lot of people, especially today, you've probably seen this whenever you're talking, they don't have a common ground. They don't understand what they're going forward towards or whatever. And as men, especially, if you don't have other men to talk to about whatever your mentality is and what you're trying to do, it
Yeah.
gets twisted quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did it ever get twisted for you when you guys were going and talking to people?
There are people that and this you have this in life. There are people that just argue because they want to argue, and
You had people argue with you?
all the time, all the time. People have misconceptions about what the LDS Church is. They think it's a pagan religion, or they would worship Joseph Smith or something like that. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
It's a Christian religion. Jesus is the Christ. He's the cornerstone of our faith.
And people were like,
"Nuh-uh, nuh-uh. It says right here in the Bible." I go, "It does, and this is
Yeah.
what also it says in the Bible."
Yeah.
Well, you can't quote the Bible because you have a Book of Mormon. No, we believe in the Bible.
So they did anyone get physical, like emotional to physical?
Quite a few emotional. I only had one person actually put their hands on me.
Really?
Yeah, and he was.
Tell me about that.
It was the cowardice thing. He just kind of kicked me in the butt as I was walking off his porch. He just kind of gave me a little.
What did you do?
I just turned and laughed.
Yeah.
I'm a
What are you
champion
gonna
wrestler.
do?
This guy's like 60 years old.
What are you gonna do?
The dust is gonna come out when I crack his leg. I'm like, what's and how's that gonna look if a Mormon missionary like body slams some 60?
Well, they'll know who did it.
Yeah.
Because you're all in uniform. You know what I mean?
I can't hide that. And I was like, what was the point of that, man? We're
Yeah.
leaving. You told us to
Yeah.
go. We're going. I'm sorry. I didn't.
Oh my gosh.
But there are people that have been physically assaulted as Mormon missionaries, but I
Yeah.
personally, that's the worst it got. But there was a lot of verbal stuff.
Do they tell you before you go on mission, these are the things to expect? Is there any of that? Or do you go on mission and have your own experience?
Both. You go to a place called the MTC, the Missionary Training Center,
Okay.
and at the time it was in Provo, Utah. Now they're regional because we have so many members of the church that are from outside the United States, and so
Yeah.
we have one in like Mexico City and Japan
Yeah.
and things like that. And so you go through kind of a training environment where they get you used to the idea
Yeah.
of wearing a suit every day, because a lot of these kids
Yeah.
have never
wore a suit.
worn suit.
Yeah.
They maybe never experienced anything like that. They've never been away from home before.
Yeah.
So you got these, at the time they were 19-year-old boys that have never done anything, never been away from home, never
Yeah.
done that. So then there's a little bit of a break-in period that there needs to be
Yeah.
to kind of get them used to the idea of,
You're gonna do
thinking
some-
outside the box. Like, mom's not here to resolve your problems. Here's how you do the laundry. This is what it means to be on time.
Yeah.
Let's make sure your shoes are shined.
That's important.
It is, especially when you're the the spokesperson for an entire religion standing on your doorstep. You don't want this guy looking like a bag of poo, and being able to communicate.
Ambassador.
I mean, he is an ambassador,
Yeah.
and vast majority of the kids at the time were going to foreign speaking missions. And so they had a couple of months to become proficient enough to explain the gospel of Jesus Christ to somebody in another language. And so that's
tough.
Yeah. Try doing that in English, let alone,
Yeah.
French or something like that. And
That's a growth thing. And it goes back to almost a Spartan culture where Spartans are believed to be like warriors for life.
Yep.
And I'm not gonna discredit that. But what I've heard and studied is that they were extremely political as well with their beliefs, their religious beliefs, and then how they trained their boys to become men.
Mhm.
And one of them was a mission. It's very similar to what you guys were doing, but they would go out and do a warrior training camp with other people of that age. So they were all of the same belief, all brought up the same way,
Right.
and then they were asked to go do something.
Right.
So I think that missions, whatever they are,
Mhm.
whatever the belief system is, I think they're super important for men that are growing up into a world that doesn't want them to be men until they're 28, 29 years old.
It's too late. at that
It's
point.
way too late.
Too late. Yeah.
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 So like having a growth where you have to, a growth experience where you have to leave. How did that feel? Like, did you feel like you were pressured to do it, or did you want to do it?
Both. There was a cultural pressure behind it. And that was a good thing because at that point in my life, my entire life was just bananas.
Your parents?
Parents divorced.
Yeah.
My mom's raising 7 kids by herself because my dad just turned into a complete knucklehead.
Yeah.
Got married 4 or 5 more times after leaving my mom after 20 years of marriage.
Yeah.
And he turned into a Disneyland dad. So the 4 older kids, there's 7 of us total, and the 4 older kids knew who he was the entire time. He was a scoundrel.
Okay.
No other way to say it. He was a scoundrel. He had two faces, one in public, one in private. He was a thief. He was a liar. And so we knew that, and we knew we weren't going to put up with his nonsense.
Yeah.
Right. And so he would come and pick up the 3 younger kids and take them to go on Disneyland adventures or go tubing down the river. Literally pull out and drive away, leaving the 4 older kids at the house.
Oh wow.
Just bye. I'm taking your siblings and leaving. And so.
And you were just watching.
I was just so bitter and I was so angry, and I was I had some undiagnosed learning disabilities that were causing me a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And hypoglycemic. The hypertension was starting to kick in.
You were going through it.
Yeah, I was really going through it, and so I had a lot of.
You were looking for your dad who wasn't there.
Right, which is for a boy is.
That's tough.
Yeah, you might as well kick the legs out from underneath him without having a positive male role model, and it doesn't have to be a dad, but there has to be somebody that boy can look up to. And
Thanks for coming to the range. We have more Jason Mow in our sights. The next episode of Target. We'll see you there.